Hello everyone, and welcome back to another trail video. Today we are running the R2 trail in Reisdorf, Luxembourg. Our ride started at the old train station in Reisdorf. From there we continued through the narrow streets of the village until reaching the first climb of the trail. At this point we are still following the R2 trail. Then I decided to leave the R2 trail behind and add a few extra climbs and kilometers to today's ride, since the R2 itself is only about 2 kilometers long. After 2 extra kilometers and around 110 meters of elevation gain, I finally rejoined the main R2 trail. Near the end of the official trail, I went looking for a few more kilometers and some extra elevation gain. So once again, I left the trail and tackled a very steep section on foot, gaining another 35 meters of elevation over just 250 meters. When I reached the end of the R2 trail, I had only logged 5.3 kilometers on my watch despite all the detours. So I decided to add one more extra loop, which brought me to the highest point of today's ride, a brutal climb of 87 meters of elevation over just 500 meters. Let's jump into it. The first extra loop was very narrow and not particularly well maintained. It was overgrown with small trees, and unfortunately there were also many fallen trees blocking the path, sometimes partially, sometimes completely. That meant a lot of climbing and finding ways around the obstacles along the way. Probably because the trail was in such poor condition. I was the only hiker out there on this section. After about 1.4 kilometers of constant ups and downs, I reached an extremely steep section. My watch showed a gradient of more than 30%. Luckily, there were no fallen trees blocking the trail on this killer climb. Back on the R2 trail, the route became much more relaxed as it led downhill toward the stream called the White Ernz. I drive past this little wooden bridge every day, and I've always wondered where it might lead. On the other side of the little wooden bridge, the trail followed small waterfalls and the White Ernz all the way back to Reisdorf. Here, I took advantage of the relatively flat terrain and slowly jogged along until I reached the village. Once I arrived back in the village, I decided to go for another extra loop and add even more elevation gain. Once again, an extremely steep wall stood in front of me, with gradients of more than 30%. Even though it was very demanding, my body handled it much better today. Since I still hadn't had enough by the end of the official R2 trail and still had some time left, I decided to go for one final extra loop. This one was packed with countless elevation gains and challenged me one last time. A short break to do some filming, catch my breath, and bring my heart rate back down. As it was the highest point of my tour, I was rewarded at the top with a beautiful view over the village of Reisdorf and the Sauer Valley. And that's it for this time. Thanks for watching, and see you again next time. Bye-bye.